those of you who don't know us yet, Sonoma Land Trust is a local nonprofit that protects land in Sonoma County for everybody's benefit. We've been doing this work since 1976 and have protected over 59,000 acres in our county so far. We accomplish our work through the generosity of our members and contributors. So thanks to all of you out there who are helping us protect beautiful Sonoma County for future generations. We so appreciate it. So as we pursue our mission of conserving land in Sonoma County, we recognize that we stand on the unceded ancestral lands of many indigenous peoples. We honor their knowledge, care, and stewardship of this special place across the ages and acknowledge the deep and lasting damage that colonization has inflicted on them. We embrace our responsibility to learn from and protect their cultural and traditional connections to the land. Please welcome Teresa and Miles Tuffli. Hi, you guys. Um, Teresa and Miles are avid birders living in Sonoma County. They especially enjoy helping fellow nature lovers and bird curious folks take the next step of getting into the field to enjoy the bird world. I had the wonderful pleasure of meeting them up on Hawk Hill several years ago during the raptor migration in the fall, and they're just fantastic. And they've led many guided walks and given many presentations to Point Reyes Birding in Nature Festival, Marin Audubon Society, Laguna de Santa Rosa Foundation, Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods, Redwood Region Ornithological Society, and many, many, many more. So Teresa and Miles, take it away.
All
Tell us
right.
about birds.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Ellie.
you. Welcome, everybody. We're just gonna share our screen here real quick. Thank you so much, Ellie and Sonoma Land Trust. We're so excited all of you can join us this evening for an exploration of the neighborhood and backyard birds of our county.
Yes.
I'm Teresa.
And I am Miles. So just a little bit about ourselves. We live in Guerneville. We've been up here for about 15 years now under the redwoods. We just really got obsessed with birding and bird watching and getting outside, noticing the birds probably about 8 years ago. Some people talk about like having a spark bird that sparks their interest. For us, it was more like the spark activity of being outside and looking at the birds. At some point, like a flip just switched in our head, and we just started noticing that birds were around everywhere. And the act of being outside, slowing down, tuning our senses into the natural world around us, I think really just hooked us at how good it made us feel. And so we just do it basically every day, all the time. We have a bird blog called I'm Birding Right Now, because we kind of never stop birding. And we have lots of blog posts, photos, and audio. Teresa takes some wonderful photographs. I make some audio recordings. We have a bunch of resources on there if you're interested in checking it out. And all the photographs and audio that you're going to hear today are all of birds here in Sonoma County, and they were captured by us.
Okay, so real quick, our agenda. We're just going to go through a few slides of some birdwatching basics. I imagine we might have some folks here tonight that are maybe brand new to the act of birdwatching or birding. And then we will jump into about 20. I'm going to spoiler alert and say that we probably added a couple more than 20, but we should have time to go through all those, some of our neighborhood birds, and then we'll wrap it up and send it back to Ellie for a Q&A with us afterwards.
All right, so bird watching basics, and this is a beautiful northern flicker here on this slide. So first, we just wanted to talk about binoculars a little bit, just touch on the optics. It's so wonderful to get a pair of binoculars and be able to bring the birds in close and look at them through a nice, clear, crisp, and bright image. So if you're interested at all in that, we really suggest getting yourself a pair of binoculars. the wonderful thing about birding and bird watching is there really is no barrier to entry. You can do it just with your bare eyes and your ears, and we really enjoy doing it that way. But if you are interested in binoculars, just wanted to kind of give you a little rundown. The 8 by 42 is the size that we generally recommend for bird watching. The 8 is the magnification, so how close the birds are going to look. And then the 42 is the millimeter diameter of this exit lens here. And that just corresponds to how much light is going to be let into the binoculars. If you want a more compact alternative, 8 by 32 works well. And if you want some more information just about like what to look for if you are going to go purchase some binoculars, feel free to reach out to us afterwards. Just send us an email and we can send you more information about how to go about doing that.
Okay, I definitely remember it can be overwhelming to sort of know how to get started and how to actually look at a bird if you're interested in identifying a bird. And some folks don't need to identify it, which is perfectly enjoyable as well. But if you are interested in ID, a great place to start when a bird is only popping up for a few seconds is to try and notice the beak or the bill of the bird. So we've included a few different varieties and styles, sizes, and shapes of beaks that you could encounter. The California towhee is a sparrow, so sparrows generally have these chunky kind of triangular beaks. And then warblers generally might have little tweezer-like beaks. Woodpeckers, you probably are familiar with that family of birds as a term, have very stout, strong, sort of giant chisel-like beaks. And then something like the marbled godwit, which is a sandpiper, has a really long, skinny beak that it likes to probe into the sand with. So if there's just one thing that you want to notice, in addition to sort of color, which your brain is already automatically going to notice, this is a really good place to start.
So another thing that is, pretty obvious when you notice a bird is the size of the bird. And so it's kind of nice to have some familiar benchmark birds on a spectrum of size. So if you see a bird that you don't recognize, you can kind of fit it somewhere in that spectrum. Like, okay, I know the robin size, I know those little sparrows on the ground. It's somewhere in the middle of that. That's another kind of good starting point on how to narrow down the bird to an identification of species. Also noticing the shape of the bird is really nice and helpful. So like a goose has a really long neck. The sparrow over there on the left is kind of much more compact.
So if you're not familiar with this term, I'm going to introduce the terminology called field marks. A field mark essentially is just a visual feature of a bird that can help identify it. So I'm just going to run through and kind of give you an example of some common field marks of birds. So this first arrow is pointing towards some head stripes. So this song sparrow has, I'd call it brown and gray stripes on the head. Then we've got some streaking on the breast, really common. So this part of the Buick's wren above the eye is referred to as, drum roll, the eyebrow. So I would call this a white eyebrow. And on this flycatcher, there is a ring around the eye, and that's referred to as a white eye ring. And then here, this last one is pointing towards what are called wing bars, which are essentially just horizontal stripes of a different color on a bird's wing. And so the more and more you learn about birds, you kind of realize that there is a vocabulary that's kind of agreed upon in order to help identify birds.
Okay, another thing to notice is some of the more kind of the big picture of what the bird is doing. And that's actually kind of some of our favorite things to notice. So look at the big picture, like where is the bird in the habitat? Is it stuck to the trunk of a tree? Is it on the ground in the blackberry bushes, underneath the blackberry bushes? Is it at the top of the trees flitting around the leaves? So what is it doing? Is it moving really fast? Is it kind of stock still? Is it just, stuck in one place? Noticing its posture is actually something that I never thought about when we were first looking at birds, but it's really true. Some birds they really have like a horizontal posture. Their just head is just looking at the ground almost all the time. Some birds, their head is kind of up and they're a little bit more vertical and they're kind of looking around. That can be a good clue. Another good clue is the bird with other birds that look similar. So that would be a flock of the same species, perhaps. Some birds are never found in flocks. They're almost always alone. Some birds are almost always found in groups. And so that's a good clue. Another thing, if they're in flocks, look around and see, are there other types of birds within that flock? And that would be considered a mixed flock. So there's so many more clues that you can glean outside of even what the bird looks like.
Okay, we are going to jump into our bird profiles. And I just kind of want to stop and say, we had to pick 20-ish birds that are common to neighborhoods in Sonoma County. And clearly there are houses in lots of different habitats around the county. We happen to live in the redwoods. And a lot of the birds that we ended up including are a little more geared towards, I'd say, like the Oaklandlands or sort of residential areas, some of the suburban areas of the county, like your regional parks with oak trees and things like that. So let's dive in. So first up, we have the American robin. And I want to point out that we've included the size of each bird here. This bird is 10 inches. And what that's measuring is from tip of the beak to tip of the tail. So what am I noticing? I'm noticing a dark gray head and back with a bright orange breast and kind of a yellow beak that is maybe shaped sort of like a cylinder. So I'm just going to try to, as we go along, kind of give you ideas of the things that you might want to notice. Where would I see this bird? I might see this bird on the ground. It's very common to see American robins walking around a grassy field, kind of walking a few steps, looking around, walking a few steps, finding an earthworm and pulling it out and consuming it. So that's a very common spot to see a robin. They're also found, within the tree and sometimes at the top of a tree when it's springtime and they're singing and they're projecting their song out. So speaking of songs, we've tried to include audio for most of these birds. So I'm about to play the song of an American robin, and this is a very, very common sound that you'll start to hear probably in the next couple of months as we approach spring. And I would describe this before I play it as a series of sort of up and down musical whistles. Hope everyone can hear that well.
Okay, the next bird we want to talk about is the Anna's hummingbird. Hummingbirds are just such fun, marvelous species to observe. They have very bright, iridescent colors both on their back and on their front, on their face. So this is a bird that the male looks different than the female. Many birds, you can't tell them apart, but this is one where the male has a little bit more color than the female. So the male is over here on the left. And you can see it's what's called a gorget, which is basically a bunch of iridescent feathers that's surrounding the throat, the neck, and it actually goes all the way up onto their head and face. And it kind of looks like it's two different colors here in the photo, but that's just a product of the iridescence and the way the sun hits it. If this was like a video and the hummingbird just tilted its head a little bit, the rest would explode with that beautiful magenta color. And over here on the right, we have the female that has these beautiful iridescent green feathers on the back. And the male shares that green feather, iridescent feathers on the back. But the female does not have that full gorget, but they do have some iridescent feathers kind of restricted to the center of the throat. Hummingbirds are they're really fun to watch. I'm sure a lot of folks have maybe hummingbird feeders in their yard and watch them hovering around and actually flying backwards, which is amazing to see a bird just be able to hover and then pull back. And the male in particular has a wonderful dive display that it does when it's trying to attract a female. So if it notices a female perched somewhere and it's trying to impress it, it will fly straight up in the air, hover for a while, kind of sing its like scrapey song, which we'll listen to here in a second, and then they dive down really fast directly at the female and pull up at the last second, and they make this really high-pitched popping noise that actually isn't a vocalization, but it's their middle tail feathers rubbing together really fast and going pop. And so let's take a listen and see if you can't hear that here. It's quite the wild sound.
Okay, the black phoebe. This is a bird in the family of birds called flycatchers. So the behavior of this bird is actually a really great clue for identifying it. Flycatchers in general are birds that will perch out in the open, like this phoebe looks like it's perched on the edge of a bench, I think. And they look visually around in their surroundings for flying bugs and flies. And if they see one they think they can grab, they'll fly out, catch it, bring it back to a perch, and then consume it. So these types of birds, the flycatchers, tend to have favorite perches around wherever it is they're hanging out in. So if you have one around your house, you might have already noticed that it likes this tree over here, or this particular branch sticking out from this tree, or that fence post over there, or something like that. So visually, it's a pretty simple bird to identify. It's just stark black and white. And if it were to turn towards us, the belly is just completely this bright white underneath. And as far as the name Black Phoebe, so Phoebe, there are a couple other phoebes. Well, there's the eastern phoebe in the eastern United States, which we don't see here. But phoebes are a type of a bird called the namesayers. They were named for a type of a sound that they make. So their song, at least somebody thought it sounded like they were saying, Phoebe, 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 Phoebe. So I don't know, you tell me. Here is the song of the Black Phoebe.
Okay, up next we have the lovely California towhee. It's easy to kind of dismiss this bird as just a plain brown bird that's deep in the bramble that isn't very interesting. But I suggest we look a little bit closer. And when we do see them in nice lighting, the cinnamon coloration around their eye and on their throat is so wonderful. And also under their base of their undertail, kind of on their butt, they have this awesome cinnamon coloration that is really, really lovely. For some reason, this bird is just kind of near and dear to our heart. It's just very charming. And it's one of the first birds that we learned the bird sound of. And so we really suggest, if you're interested at all in identifying birds by the sounds they make, California towhee is a wonderful place to start, because we can almost guarantee that you have one living at least in your neighborhood, if not in your backyard. So once you try to start listening out for it, you'll probably hear this sound. One of the best descriptions of the sound I have heard is somebody told us that they thought it sounded like a fire alarm when it needs its battery replaced. So let's see if that resonates with anybody here. So next time you hear that sound out in your yard or on your neighborhood walk, see if you can't notice a California towhee somewhere on the ground or low to the ground and try to identify it. But we don't suggest trying to change its battery. I don't think it needs that.
So I wanted to add on about the towhee, that a really sweet fact of it is that it is one of those bird species that mates for life. So if you see a California towhee, you probably see its partner somewhere in the vicinity. They're often foraging quite close together. They do, however, have a really special vocalization that's reserved for times where perhaps they've been a little bit apart in distance, foraging or doing other things, and then they come back together. So they refer to this sound as a duet squeal. And I'm going to play it for you in a second, but I just want to kind of point your attention to noticing that it's almost like a palpable energy that you can feel in the birds reuniting with each other. So let's listen to that. And this is a sound that occasionally we'll hear on a trail. We'll be walking by and it'll just kind of come out of the bush. So maybe they're reuniting within a bush out of sight. But every time we hear it, I know what's happening and it always makes me smile.
Okay, so sticking with a couple other birds in the sparrow family. I don't know if I mentioned the towhee is a sparrow, even though it doesn't have sparrow in the name. Two of the other sparrows that we see here in the fall and winter are the white-crowned sparrow and the golden-crowned sparrow. And so both these birds nest up in the far north in Canada and even as far as the Aleutian Islands. The white-crowned sparrow actually does nest here in the county, so they're actually here year-round, but they're restricted to the narrow strip on the coastal region. So you'd have to go out to Jenner or Bodega Bay to see the white-crowned sparrow in the spring and summer. But in the fall and winter, they are all over the county, even inland. And so over here we have the golden crowned sparrow. You can see that it does have a little bit of yellow coloration on the center of its forehead. And during its breeding months, that is much more bold and vibrant. You can see it's on the ground where it's been eating some seeds, just as sparrows are apt to do. It even has some kind of gunk on its bill from foraging. And then over on the left, we have the white crowned sparrow and its bold black and white stripes on the crown and a yellow beak, which is a really great identification point for this bird because for the whole first year of their life, their white crown is actually more gray and brown stripes on their head. So they don't really have their white crown until the second year of their life, but they do have that yellow bill the whole time. So if you're looking at a sparrow, try to get a sense of what the color of its beak is.
Okay, we're going to move on to a member of the finch family. So similarly to the sparrow family, which likes to eat seeds, finches like seeds as well. Whereas you would most often see sparrows on the ground eating seeds, I'd say that finches, you're probably a little more likely to see them kind of hanging out on low grasses, sometimes in low bushes. And then sometimes you'll see them kind of congregated up at the top of an oak tree, just kind of hanging out and preening. So this is one of those birds that has different looks, whether it's male or female. So the female is generally all brown and then has a lot of these streaks on her breast. And the male is identical to that, except he has kind of a cherry red coloration, a wash on the top of his head and then on the front of the breast. And the house finch has a lovely song. I think I would describe it as sort of a chaotic musical jumble and it's probably I'd call them whistles. So just this jumble of whistles. And this is another one that you're going to hear a lot of come springtime. So try to listen to this one, keep it in your mind, and then see if you can't notice it come March or April.
Okay, up next we have the Nuttall's woodpecker. And so woodpeckers have very cool behavior where they're just almost always just attached to the trunk of a tree or a thick branch, probing in the bark or drilling holes in the bark to find their food. We get, I think, about 7 woodpeckers, 7 or 8 woodpeckers here in the Greater Bay Area. And they're really lovely family of birds, really fun. The Nuttall's woodpecker, I would say, is probably the most common one in like residential areas. They do really love oak trees, and they're really fun because they often announce their presence. They're quite a vocal woodpecker. So we'll play that call for you in a second. I did want to point out the back pattern of this Nuttall's woodpecker. You can see it has a black back with a bunch of horizontal white stripes all the way up and down the back. And if you are looking at a woodpecker, try to get a look at its back pattern because that'll tell you pretty much what it is. Is it just solid black? Does it have these horizontal white stripes on it, or does it have a vertical white patch? That will tell you a lot to be able to narrow down what species you're looking at. I can see that this one also has some red on the top of the head, on the crown, and that indicates that this one is a male. The females are just black and white all the way through, but they do have that same back pattern. So I did mention that they are quite vocal. So this is a sound you hear quite often out in the oak woodlands. And here we go. A real ringing sound that really just kind of cuts through everything.
Ooh, now we're getting into some small birds. Here is the oak titmouse. As its name suggests, this is a very common bird in our local oak trees. And it's a member of a family of birds called the tits. So what I'm seeing is just a very sort of round, sort of egg-shaped, plain light gray and dark gray bird with a pretty tiny beak. But the most distinguishing feature of the oak titmouse is this gray crest right here. It's kind of hard to miss, and I feel like that makes it a pretty easily identifiable bird. So they are most often seen actually in the oak trees, kind of jumping around the branches, pecking at the undersides of leaves, looking for food in that fashion. And I'm about to play a pretty common sound of theirs. It is, I think it has kind of a raspy or harsh, kind of almost an agitated sound and a little like it's annoyed at you. But this is a really, really common sound that you can hear. And just, the intensity of that particular recording and just the kind of the urgency or the repetition of it makes me want to venture a guess that it might have been an alarm call and it was alarming at something, but that's just a guess.
Okay, next up we have the closely related chestnut-backed chickadee. There are several chickadees in different parts of North America. Here in coastal California, we get the lovely chestnut-backed chickadee that has that chestnut coloration on its back, as well as on its flanks there. And then all chickadees have that black and white, some style of that black and white high contrast pattern on their head. And chickadees are just a really charming, charming bird. They're often in little groups. And in the winter and fall months, they're often kind of the nucleus of what are known as mixed flocks. So a lot of other birds like to hang out with the chickadee basically and forage with them. And so it's really fun when you do see a chickadee when you're out birding in the winter. It's a good idea to look around to see if there's other species of birds nearby, even in the same tree, hanging out and foraging together. Teresa mentioned the idea of some birds being considered namesayers, where they're named for the sound they make, and the chickadee is one of those because they do make a sound that kind of sounds like they're saying chickadee, chickadee, dee, dee, dee. So let's see if you can't hear that in this recording.
We have a lot of chickadees that hang out around our house and come to our little water dish, and they're really vocal. And I can never get enough of their little high-pitched jangly sounds. Ooh, the bush tit. Speaking of small birds, this is quite a small one. So 4.5 inches, and that includes the tail. So, the body of this bird is just 3.5 inches or so. This is a pretty common way that you'll see them hanging upside down from some foliage. And right now in wintertime, you're almost always going to see this bird in a large flock of bush tits, sometimes 10, sometimes 20 birds. They will sort of descend upon a tree or a bush, and it's like you notice one moving around, and all of a sudden, all these other ones just start popping out like little popcorns. And we included a picture of the bush tit nest because it is just a wonder. It looks like a long, kind of stretchy, hanging sack or sock. And they make it out of lichen and other plant material and some spider webs and things like that. I think that it's lined to be very soft on the inside. And it often has the entry up at the top. So this is a nest that a lot of people can sometimes locate in their yard or in a park. And speaking of nest, actually, this is a nice time to sort of remind everybody that nesting season for birds is a really vulnerable time for the parents and for the eggs and then the youngsters as well. So if you do ever encounter a bird nest, it's always a good idea to really, really keep your distance from the nest and don't linger too long, don't look too closely. We just want to make sure we're not disturbing the birds. And before I move on to the sound, a fun feature about the bush tit is you can actually tell the males and females apart based on the color of their eye. So the one that we're showing here is a female. So females have this pale, it's almost white, it's maybe a pale yellow or something, iris. But the male birds have a dark iris. And it's kind of neat to be able to identify those when you get a really nice look at them out in the field. So the sound of a bush tit, I'm actually going to play the sound of a bush tit flock. To us, we've always kind of described them as tiny little tambourine noises. It's a very light, delicate noise. I'm going to play this right here.
The tambourine tit.
Everybody wants to play the tambourine in the bush tit band.
Okay, the next bird we want to talk about is the white-breasted nuthatch. This is a bird with another really fun behavior. They love to attach to trunks of trees and branches of trees, just like a woodpecker. But instead of drilling into the tree, they're kind of using their little chisel-like bill to kind of poke in the crevices of the bark and look for food that way, spiders, spider eggs, larvae, anything that is tasty to a nuthatch. They're also kind of acrobatic and can hang upside down. So you see this one is actually making his way down or her way down the tree, which is just kind of a bizarre thing to witness. And they also often take this posture where they're attached to the tree, but then they lift their head up and making this like little like ramp shape, which is just really fun. They also have a really charming sound that we really like. It's very kind of nasally. It just sounds a little goofy, almost like kazoo-like. So let's listen to that. And so we get three different nuthatches here in the county. But the white-breasted nuthatch is the one that's, most closely associated to like oak woodlands and most often found in residential areas.
And this is going to be the last of the smaller section of birds. The yellow-rumped warbler is in the family of birds called the warblers. And when I think of warblers, I often think of springtime and songs. You know, warblers are known for their lovely musical songs. But this happens to be a warbler that we get only here in the county in fall and winter. So come springtime, this bird is going to migrate away to go breed in a different area. So what am I noticing on this bird? I'm noticing this yellow rump. This is what it's known for. Birders tend to call this bird by a loving term called butterbutt. It looks like it has a pat of butter on the back of its, like the upper tail. But sometimes when it's perched, you can't see that because the wings will cover up that patch of yellow. So you can look for the yellow that's on the other spots of the bird. Sometimes, well, all the time on the side over here by the, right under the wing on the flank of the bird. Some of them, a particular subspecies has yellow on the throat, which this one doesn't. And every now and then you can see little bits of yellow on top of the head as well.
Okay, the mourning dove. This is not morning as in morning, afternoon, evening, and night dove, but it's morning as in a mournful song that they sing. So they have a really lovely coo that is often mistaken for an owl sound because it does, sound a little like it's hooting, but it's a little higher pitched, and you can easily learn to tell that apart. So this mourning dove that we're looking at here is on the ground, maybe gonna have a drink of water. Doves are one of the only species or families of birds that can actually suction water in through their bill. Most other birds have to, when they want a drink of water, have to scoop the water and let gravity do the work. But doves can actually suck water right up from the ground. And their tail, the mourning dove tail, is probably the most noticeable part to me. They have a really long, like tapered tail that comes to a point, as you can see here in the left corner. If you do get a close look at the wings, you see these kind of dark spots on the wing, and that's another good field mark to tell the mourning dove apart from the other doves that we get here. And I always like to point out this really cool feature that this powder blue ring around the eye, which is actually skin. Most birds have teeny tiny feathers that surround the eye, but for whatever reason, the mourning dove has an exposed powder blue skin there, which I just find really lovely, especially when the light hits it nice. But I mentioned their mournful song, and so we're going to play that. And at the end of this recording, there's a different kind of sound that's actually the sound of the mourning dove's wings flapping as it's coming into land, which it often makes and is a fun thing to notice. I just love that Doppler effect of the wings right there. It's very nice.
All right, so another one of our doves, the Eurasian collared dove, known for this black collar on the back of its neck. And color-wise, the collared dove is quite a pale gray, like a cool pale gray, compared to the mourning dove, which is often more like a warm brown. And the collared dove lacks those wing spots that the mourning dove has. And also, if you were to see this bird perched up in the same fashion as that mourning dove picture, the tail would not look nearly as like long and skinny and tapered. So doves in general, I'd say the collared dove and the mourning dove, someplace you'd probably notice them. You've probably noticed them like this. Maybe sometimes perched on wires, perched on tops of telephone poles, places like that. Sometimes puttering around the ground like these two. And we heard the sound of the mourning dove, and it's kind of fun actually. The doves, you can learn their sounds based on, you can count the number of notes and the pattern. So that mourning dove had 5 notes, and it kind of went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The collared dove has 3 notes, and they're all on the same pitch, and they are often repeated incessantly. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to play that now. And don't get mad at me because now that you've learned this one and you start hearing it, you might hear it go on and on and on and on and wish maybe you never tuned into it. But I like it. I think the doves and the pigeons have such striking tones to their
Yeah.
sounds.
Okay, up next, the northern mockingbird. So the mockingbird is named for the sounds it makes. So as the name suggests, it likes to mimic other birds that it hears in its environment and learn the sounds that they make, and then it makes them for itself. It also will mimic like man-made sounds, even like car alarms, and sometimes the mockingbird can actually even sound like a car alarm. This is another bird that will sing kind of over and over and over again, really incessantly. But they prove their worth, their fitness to the female by how many different phrases they can learn throughout their lifetime. So they just kind of rack them up year after year and sing them, sing full-throated from the tops of the tree in order to attract a female. As far as how they look, they're pretty plain, slightly darker gray on the back, lighter gray underneath. They do have a really cool feature that their eye color is light. So when the light hits it nicely, and if you're looking in binoculars, you can really see this kind of like amber eye color of the iris, which is really cool. They do have quite the long tail, so they look quite elongated. Then in the top right, we see what they look like with their wings unfolded, and they expose these like really high contrast white patches in their wings, which is really fun to see when they fly. And if its tail was spread, it also has really high contrast white edges on the sides of the tail as well. But we were talking about the Mockingbird song, and so of course we have a recording of it. And just notice the best way actually to identify the mockingbird, that you're hearing a mockingbird and not those individual birds that it's mimicking, is the pattern in which it sings. So it often repeats each phrase, usually about 3 times, sometimes 2 to 5 times, and it just repeats one phrase 3 times, and then goes on to the next phrase 3 times, and then the next phrase, and the next phrase, on and on. Let's take a listen to that. Always makes me laugh.
All right. If you have trouble with crows versus ravens when you're just looking at a single bird, you are in a good company. You're not alone. But we're hoping to make it slightly easier by kind of pointing out the differences of these two. First, of course, is the size. So the crow is a lot smaller than the raven. And their beaks are also sort of similarly smaller and larger. So when I look at this crow, clearly it has a big beak, but somehow it just feels a little bit more like it fits its face or its head appropriately. But the common raven's beak just looks gargantuan compared to its head, I think. And even, taller where it sits on the face. Another nice detail, it's pretty subtle and you have to get a good look at it, is the throat of each bird. So the American crow has very sleek throat feathers, whereas the common raven has a bit of a shaggy patch of feathers on its throat. This photo is really highlighting that shaggy patch of feathers, but it's something that you can often notice if you get a close enough view. Then another way we love to tell them apart is by their sound. And I think a lot of people already know the sound an American crow makes, which is caw, 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 kind of a little higher pitched with an A sound, caw. And then its counterpart, the raven, is often a little bit more deeper in pitch and sometimes a little guttural, like it has phlegm in its throat. And if you were to write out their most common sound, I would write it as bronk, B-R-O-N-K. Bronk, 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 bronk. So I'm going to play these two sounds back to back. So first, we're going to start with the crow. And now let's listen to the raven and try to notice the bit more deeper, a bit more resonant, and a little gurgly. Some people, I think, also would refer to it as a croak. And there's one more feature that can help distinguish the two, which is the shape of the tail. So if a single bird flies overhead, if you are looking up, it might be a little difficult to tell how big is that bird since there's nothing around to compare it to. So clue in on the tail. The crow, when the crow's tail is fanned out, it looks just like what I would call an average bird tail, just sort of gently rounded. But the raven has a baseball diamond tail, or they call it a wedge or a paddle, which basically is just describing that the center tail feathers are the longest, and then they taper off towards the sides to kind of create this V shape at the bottom.
The California scrub jay. So often we hear this bird referred to as like a blue jay. And it is a jay that is blue in color, but the blue jay itself is an actual species that is an East Coast species. So we don't get them out here in California, but we do get the California scrub jay. And they are in the same family of birds as the crows and ravens. The family is called the corvids. They're very intelligent, very smart, very gregarious. They're often in small groups. And you maybe have noticed if you have bird feeders in your yard that they're kind of like the bullies of the backyard bird world. They are often chasing off the smaller birds and just being really noisy and aggressive and kind of wreaking havoc. But they are also a really fun bird to just kind of watch their antics. And they are really beautiful with this beautiful blue on the head and the tail and the wings. They can be kind of tricky to identify sometimes if you see them like up in a tree and you're just looking up at them and they're facing you because they just look almost all gray. They do have a little bit of blue on the neck here, but they can be kind of tricky from certain angles that you don't really see the blue. But we talked about their kind of noisy, aggressive calls a little bit. So I'm going to play a recording for you that we made near our yard. And we're going to talk about Stellar's Day.
So we included the scrub jay because it is so widespread across the county, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the other jay that we have. So we have two jays in the county and in the Bay Area in general, and that's the Stellar's jay. The Stellar's jay is also blue, but it's blue and black with this nice tall black crest, as opposed to that blue and gray with the rounded head of the scrub jay. And the Stellar's jay is a little bit more restricted to places like conifer forests. So, you know, we're in the redwoods, and the Stellar's jay is who appears around our house all the time.
Ooh, the turkey vulture. I love talking about the turkey vulture. They are just such a cool bird. Some people seem to be a little turned off by their featherless head, and I can understand that it does look a little wild to see a bird without any feathers on their head. It's just this red skin that's exposed, but it's actually due to the food they eat. They eat carrion, so they eat animals that are already dead. And if you're going to be sticking your head into that, you don't really want feathers to really kind of gather all that gunk and bacteria from the way you're eating. So vultures don't have any feathers on their head. They are a very, very important part of our ecosystem. We like to think of them as kind of like the cleanup crew. So they're part of like the decomposers. And a cool fact about them, well, there's so many cool facts, but one is that they actually detect their food mostly by their sense of smell. So like, you know, all raptors, they do have really great eyesight, but their smell is what tips them off to animals that have died, like in the forest. We see them soaring all over the in our skies here in Guerneville, and you really can't see the ground from above with all the redwood trees. So they're obviously detecting their prey not through sight, or not prey, I guess the carrion. Another cool thing is their Latin name is Cathartes aura, which translates to purifying breeze, which I just feel like is such a poetic way of describing their kind of niche in the ecosystem. And, just makes it seem a little cooler than turkey vulture for whatever reason. But yeah, I just really, really love this bird.
Well, we are getting close to the end here. We're wrapping up with two of our common hawk species, the red-shouldered hawk on the left and the red-tailed hawk on the right. So we'll start with the red-shouldered. This is a bird that gets its name from this very inconspicuous red patch here on the shoulder. Sometimes you can't actually even detect this. So the thing that we like to point out as more identifiable is really this stark, high contrast, black and white sort of checkerboard pattern right here on the wing. And then this black and white striped tail, just very, very high contrast. And we're looking at an adult red-shouldered here. So the adults have this nice, bright orange chest as well. The red-tailed hawk on the right is known for this tail. And I think it's generally, it's just more of an orange than a red. And other than that, they're generally a mixture of brown and cream. So their backs are pretty much brown, their heads are brown, their backs are brown, but you can kind of see this splotchy, sort of creamy white speckling on the back. And sometimes you can notice that it's in a shape of a V right here. That can be a subtle clue about a perched red-tailed hawk. The red-tailed hawk is just a little bit bigger than the red-shouldered. The red-tailed, when perched, tends to look very bulky, like it. People describe it as almost a football shape, whereas the red-shouldered is a lot daintier and feels more slender, feels more small. And of course, as always, you can use sound to identify these two as well. I will play those in a second, but we're also including the silhouettes. So the red-shouldered hawk, you can see, has that nice black and white checkerboard all the way around here. And I do recognize that the red-tailed could also be called something like a checkerboard underneath, but check out that black and white striped tail. And then all of that orange on the breast and underneath the wings right here. The red-tailed hawk, when flying, shows that lovely orange tail. When it gets illuminated from the sun above, that color just really shines through the underneath side of the tail. But a bit of a little thing is that the red-tailed hawks in the first year of their life do not have that orange tail, which makes things a little confusing. So how do we know we're looking at a red-tailed hawk? We like to rely on what these two arrows are pointing to, which are these long, dark strips right on the leading edge of the wing underneath the bird. This area of the bird is called it's called a patagial mark. And even the young red-tailed hawks that don't have an orange tail will show this mark. And first sound is going to be the red-shouldered hawk. This is a bird that is quite vocal. It vocalizes when it's soaring around, it vocalizes when it's perched, and the key thing about this is it's very repetitive. And in contrast, the red-tailed hawk makes a single elongated screech, which I bet you will recognize from movies. This is the sound that most movies will play anytime they're showing a soaring bird in the sky, whether it's a vulture or an eagle. Sometimes they get it right and they do it with the red-tailed hawk. So let's take a listen.
Okay, so that wraps up the kind of bird profiles that we had. I think we snuck in a little more than 20 birds there, but it was hard to narrow it down. But we did our best at that. But if you're interested to learn more, check out our website. We have tons of just resources for birders or people kind of interested in learning more about birding. We have tips for beginners section, and just a lot of blog posts where we kind of share our little adventures around the county and elsewhere, documenting our kind of bird sightings. And then we did want to mention the Merlin Bird ID app, which is really, really cool. It's a free app put out by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it helps you identify birds both visually. But the coolest thing is that it has this feature that allows you to try to identify the birds by sound. You just press this button on the app, and then it will listen for the bird sounds that's surrounding it. And if it picks it up clear enough, it will tell you what it is, or it gives you an idea of what it could be. And the accuracy is actually quite high. We were very impressed with the accuracy, but it's really fun to just like open your window in the morning, say, and put the Merlin Bird ID sound ID on, and you might be amazed that you have, 10 different birds out in your backyard that you actually had no idea were there. So that's a really cool app to get.
And then lastly, the best way to learn more about birds is to get out there and just start looking at them. So if you are particularly interested in going out on a guided outing with us, stay tuned. We're going to be setting up a couple of springtime outings with Sonoma Land Trust on one of their properties. And Miles and I also organize group walks, which you can find information about on our website. And I can also mention that, you can always look up, there's often birding clubs around. There's Audubon Society chapters and other types of birding clubs that often offer free field trips. And it's just a nice way to connect with other people and get out there and learn about spots to go birding in the county. So you can find links to all of those organizations as well on our website under the resources page also. And that's it. So we're going to hand it back to Ellie now. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. If you're interested, please stick around for some Q&A right now. But we're really grateful for all of you to have tuned in tonight and for Sonoma Land Trust to have had us. So thanks again. And we're going to stop sharing our screen and send it back to Ellie to guide us through the Q&A.
All right. That was fantastic. Oh my God, there's just so many. The chat is just hot with all these wonderful kudos and accolades, and thanks to the both of you for just an amazing presentation. And I don't know about everybody else, but I always learn something new, like the duet squeal of the California Toey. Oh my God. Um, and I know that everybody's going to be going out there and impressing their family and friends with their either newfound knowledge or added knowledge, and we'll all be looking up at the sky going, okay, Raven, Crow, well, hey. So that was fantastic. I think before we get to the Q&A, I'll just for those who want to aren't planning to stay and are going to sign off, just a few things. Please stay connected to the Land Trust by following our various social media accounts or visiting our website. You can keep an eye out for more Language of the Land webinars, which we've now been doing, gosh, maybe 4 years at least, maybe 5, under sonomalandtrust.org outings. And remember, we're a nonprofit organization, so that means we rely on donations from all of you and from businesses and foundations to make our work possible. So if you like what you heard today, please consider donating, and your gift helps support protection and conservation and preservation of everything we hold near and dear to our hearts here in Sonoma County. And you can do that by going to our website and clicking on the donate button. So we really appreciate everybody here who's supporting our work. So let's get to some questions. There are some questions in the chat and also in the Q&A. So I might do some comboing. There was a question about what do I need in my yard to attract birds? And another person who added to that, and could you recommend specific plants that birds might be attracted to in my yard?
That is a great question. And there's just a very broad answer that is native plants. The birds that are in their natural ranges. So the birds that are here in their natural habitat are, of course, going to gravitate towards the plants that they have become accustomed to over the long, long, long span of time that they've been in these areas. So, native oak trees are a great place to start. There are specific types of flowering plants that can attract hummingbirds. And off the top of my head, I don't have a list of those things. I think that if you were to Google, California native gardens, I think that would be a really good place to start to learn some of those specific plants that you could add to the gardening.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I'd also just mention, we don't really do bird feeders at our place, but just a bird, like a water dish that, they use to mostly drink. Every once in a while, we'll see one bathe in there. It's just really important to keep everything clean that you have. And we'll actually drop a couple links in the chat here, for
That'd be great.
some information that's much more knowledgeable than we are about specifically kind of feeders and water, but, keeping it cleaned regularly is really important.
Great. So why is that California towhee pecking at my backsliding glass window?
Oh, that is a good question. We see that a lot. Dark-eyed juncos, we see that with. And often it's, they're seeing a reflection and they think it's just another bird. And so it can be in like, we've seen it on car mirrors, like side mirrors, where a bird will just kind of get obsessed with thinking their reflection is a different bird. And especially during breeding season, you can see an uptick in that where they will, fly up and just kind of peck at their reflection and they're just trying to, push away a potential competitor. So it's kind of, it's funny. And then when you realize kind of what's going on, you're like, oh, poor thing. It's probably a little stressed out. I know there's like protections to help birds not fly into windows, like strips you can put, like reflective strips you can put on your windows and such like that. And that could potentially help with that behavior as well. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Um, Somebody asked, do hummingbirds live in the redwoods?
Yes, we actually have them here in Guerneville as well. And so they're actually quite widespread through all the kind of micro habitats of Sonoma County. So they definitely nest here in the redwoods as well as, we've seen nests at Regal Ranch Regional Park, and then out in Windsor, what's that, Foothill Regional Park, but also here in the redwoods.
Another participant asked, if I find a baby bird, can I feed it and what should I do?
Go
Yes.
ahead.
So I would, we have a pretty detailed blog post about this, and we can pop that in the chat as well. But very generally, I would say if you found a baby bird, there is a really good chance that it's okay and that its parent knows where it's at and will continue to come by and feed it and care for it. One thing, if you're concerned about it, you can maybe give it some distance, step back and assess the situation from afar and see if you notice the parent somewhere around. And if you do, I would say, honestly, the best thing to do for it is to leave it be. If it is directly in harm's way, if it's like fallen into the middle of a road, it's perfectly okay to scoop it up gently and move it off to the side somewhere where it's out of direct harm's way. But in general, most baby birds, sometimes they fall out of their nest unintentionally, but sometimes there is a stage of a baby bird's life where they intentionally are out of the nest and they're kind of just hanging out, being really vulnerable on the ground as they're starting to get their wings, so to speak.
Great. And if people are also probably following the chat while we're asking questions of you, there's some wonderful responses so everybody should take a look. There's some wonderful responses about places to go for native plants and the cowscape site and all kinds of really good stuff that we don't have time to talk about now, but people can take a look at that. How about places to go? And I want to say best places to go in Sonoma County, but some of your favorite, some of
Yeah.
places that you go to again and again that you could
Yeah.
recommend.
It's funny. I have an answer to that is just kind of funny that really anywhere here, wherever you are, there are birds around. And that was actually one of the kind of real eye-opening things for me when we got interested in birds, is just realizing how they're everywhere. And we've had some amazing bird sightings at our local Safeway parking lot, just by keeping our eyes and ears open. That said, here in Sonoma County, there's just so many awesome spots that you can, get far away from your house and explore the county through the bird life. So I think we had a kind of a list of some of our favorites.
Well, right now, so in wintertime, winter is a great time to go experience ducks and waterfowl and some other water-related birds. So go to Bodega Harbor. Go take a drive around Bodega Bay. If you drive around the harbor, there's tons of places you can pull over on the side and check out all the birds in the water. Another favorite place is Ellis Creek Water Treatment Facility, and Schollenberger Park. They are just often chock full of birds in the water around this time of year. And then for springtime, when it comes to be breeding season, we just love looking at songbirds, and a great place. Honestly, any oak woodlands is going to be a nice place to see a lot of birds. We're in West County, so we really like places like Regal Ranch Regional Park, Foothill Ranch in Windsor. What's the other one? Shiloh Park in Windsor is good. And there's just, Crane Creek Regional Park is a really, really pleasant one too. And Laguna de Santa Rosa Trail and Sebastopol.
Yeah, do we have another couple hours? I just put a link of our eBird hotspots in Sonoma County. And so there's literally, I think, like 50 spots there that are kind of known to be really bird rich.
Yeah, like a high concentration of birds.
So here's the thank you for all that, and for everybody who's responding with more great ideas and places. What's the purpose, from a bird's point of view, for the abundant morning vocalization of birds?
Ooh, that's a good question. So that phenomenon particularly happens, or at least at the highest level, in the spring time. So there's this wonderful thing that's known as the dawn chorus that, even before the sun starts peeking up, you start to hear maybe a robin starting to sing, and then they're joined, by the black-headed grosbeak and the violet-green swallow and some of the birds that start appearing in our area to breed here in the springtime. And basically, they're just announcing that they survived yesterday, they survived the night, and they're on their territory. And if they already have a mate, they're just letting the mate know that, hey, I'm still here, we're still good to go, everything's great. To any other males around of the same species, like, this is still my area, this is my breeding habitat, this is my food source, so don't get too close or we might have a problem. Sometimes it's like they're solving conflict via song. So it's like West Side Story out there. They're just like at each other. Very rarely are they actually, making contact in their aggression, but that does happen. But
So,
basically, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, following up on that, and we all love the Merlin app and are using it. Sometimes you'll see that there's a call there, and sometimes you'll see that there's a song as well. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Yes.
Great question.
So songs are this is a generalization, but songs are reserved for breeding purposes. So generally, breeding season is in the springtime going into summer. So songs essentially are providing one of two functions. Number one is for a bird to sing if it does not have a mate and it's trying to attract a mate. And then the other purpose is perhaps it already has a mate. It is to declare and defend its territory. And in general, it's often been thought for a very long time that only male birds sing, but there is some research coming out that's showing that some particular species of female birds also have a little type of a song sometimes. So calls, on the other hand, is a very broad term for all the other sounds that a bird makes that are not technically songs. And calls are produced by birds all year round. And there's lots of little types of calls. So there are contact calls, for example, which is two birds, maybe it's a mated pair or members of a flock that are staying in contact with one another. There are alarm calls, of course, when there is a predator nearby and a bird is wanting to alert the other birds in the area. There are begging calls of a baby bird that are basically saying, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me. And there's flight calls. Some birds make a little sound when they take off. And so that's just a very general distinction between those two types of sounds. So yeah, we love birding by ear and knowing the songs of birds as well as a lot of the calls of birds. There is still a very rich soundscape in the wintertime even.
That was great. That was a great answer. Thank you. So are there things that one can put on their windows to prevent birds crashing into the windows?
Yeah, I think there are products like it's something you can kind of hang in. I don't know if it's necessarily outside or inside that just makes it obvious that the reflection isn't just like more space. Because I think that's what often happens is, you know, the trees are just reflected and they think that there's just more trees through the window and, you know, they fly right into them. So I think there's some stuff that you can maybe even stick like decals on your window or like little streamers that kind of just hang there. Those are a couple of the products I've seen, but I'm sure like a Google search could give you even more.
I think both Cornell and Audubon sell the shadow birds that you can put on your window so that when a bird is coming at it, it knows that there's something there rather than nothing.
Yes.
So let's see. Can you talk a little bit about the lifespan for a couple of the birds that you covered?
Sure. In general, the lifespan of a bird is kind of follows the pattern that the larger the bird, the longer the lifespan. So for a lot of those tiny little songbirds that we kind of went through today, I'm gonna take a guess that they might only live a handful of years. Um, Looks like Miles just looked up the American robin, for example, and it says that they might only live 2 years, but they have recorded them up to about 14 years.
And like on that note, like in order to get that information, a bird has to be like mist netted. So basically captured and put a ring around their feet and then
Captured again
get
later.
like fly into another mist net 14 years later. And then they're like, oh wow, this robin was first, you know, ringed 14 years ago. So who knows how many that we didn't get that information that continued to live. But yeah, in general, the larger the bird, the longer the lifespan.
If you go up, into the larger sizes like hawks, then I'm going to guess that it could be anywhere from, this is just a spitball, maybe 5 to 15 years or something. And all of this is kind of with a caveat that wild birds are just vulnerable all the time, especially the smaller the songbird, the more threats and just predators that they have. So it can be challenging to think about what the lifespan is of a wild bird as opposed to if that bird were in captivity, how long could it live? So I think that the oldest birds, so bald eagles, for example, when we're getting up to that size, I feel like it could be 30 to 40 years or something like that. And I think that the oldest bird that they've ever been able to track and record is a type of an albatross that I think is, if not already, almost 70 years old.
Yeah. Just had what, a new chick?
Oh my
Wow.
gosh, that's so
Yeah.
exciting. If anyone's interested in that, the name of this bird, they've named it Wisdom. So look that one up. It's
Yeah.
pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So this is kind of a 3 or 4 part question, but that all relates. So the first part of the question is why do birds flock together? And then there's some folks that were asking about what are the kinds of birds that do flock together, and you see them in Sonoma County in huge flocks or murmurations, and where could one see that? So
I
it's
think
like,
Yeah, I think in general, it's just a safety in numbers type thing. In the winter months, I think I mentioned a little bit about mixed flocks, where several different species will all be kind of hanging out together, and there'll be 20 birds in a little grouping of trees, and they all kind of take different niche. They're like some of them are at the very tip tops of the trees, some of them are clinging to the trunks and the branches. But the more eyeballs there are, the more safety there is, and they're all listening to each other for their calls, and sometimes their calls, like Teresa mentioned, the contact call. They're making sounds, but the sounds basically mean like, "Hey, everything's copacetic, we're safe, nothing weird's going on." Then another call might be reserved for an aerial predator. So then, oh my gosh, there's a Cooper's hawk nearby, and then everybody kind of goes quiet, or there's specific alarm calls for a ground predator like a cat. So I think that's a big part of it. Those murmurations that you mentioned are incredible to witness. The European starlings just can group together in thousands and thousands of birds. And sometimes you can see them from Highway 101 in the winter and fall. I feel like they were documented a couple years ago really regularly down in like Marin County or San Rafael or something, but where they're just creating these almost 3D sculptures in the sky of clouds of birds. And then you'll see a like peregrine falcon try to pick one of them off. And it's really difficult for the predators to isolate one bird in that giant murmuration. So it's much, much safer to be in a large group than it is to be like a single starling hanging out in a tree with a Cooper's hawk nearby. So that'd be my best guess anyway.
Oh,
But
that's
there's
great.
there's lots of other flocking birds, like sparrows are kind of famous for in the winter of gathering in number
Hmm.
50 to 100 white crowned and golden crowned sparrows. Finches are flocking birds. You very rarely just see a single finch. There's usually a group of them, goldfinch as well. But yeah, like why some
Birds.
blackbirds, yeah, why some species like to hang out with others of their kind and some are individuals. I don't really know the answer
Yeah,
to.
good question.
One of life's mysteries. Maybe someday.
Good thing to look up.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a more serious question, and that is another kind of combination. Uh, People have mentioned the issues regarding house cats and the threat they are to birds, but what would you say are the biggest threats to wild birds? Others have mentioned avian flu, and basically, what can we do?
Yeah, house cats is definitely a sensitive topic for some people, you know. We've had cats in the past and they've always been indoors, and I just kind of understand it's usually what you grow up with, you know, whether you take your cats outside or you don't let them indoors or outdoors. But they do pose a threat to wild birds. Their cats are wonderful hunters, and birds are everywhere around your house. So that is a bit of a deadly combination for birds. I'd say another threat to birds is habitat loss.
Yeah.
Right now, I think a lot of the grassland species are really suffering from habitat loss. So there's things like the tricolored blackbird is declining. I think even something like American kestrels are declining a little bit, and that's another one. That's a bit of a big topic. I don't know how easily a single person can stop the
Yeah.
spread of population and
How to wind
yeah.
that back is obviously very difficult, but organizations like Sonoma Land Trust that's doing so much work to conserve the lands that are
Mhm.
still wild is, so important. So getting involved with those local
Hmm.
nature organizations, donating to them, donating your time, your money, your resources in that fashion, I'd say would is a great way to help.
Hmm. Yeah, several people have just commented how they are seeing less Coopers, less kestrels, less kites than in places that they normally would in years past. So,
No.
And
um,
that's tough. Like those are that kind of the like higher in the chain. And so
right.
those birds are suffering. It usually means that there's issues, all the way down the line.
Yeah. Do most birds, I always wondered this, use the same nest year after year?
I would say, in general, maybe it kind of depends on what kind of a bird we're talking about. So, the large birds like hawks and ospreys. Ospreys are really known for reusing nests. So we happen to live along the Russian River, and there are a handful of nests that are easily seen that just get reused every year. And it's kind of neat with ospreys because they start, once a nest starts, every year they just add more to it. And so it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger over the years. We've seen other types of hawks, like a red-shouldered hawk reusing nests, Cooper's hawk reusing nests. But some of the smaller birds, I think, tend to recreate nests each year.
Yeah, like the bush tit nest that we shared a photo of is a classic example that, that's there in the spring and summer, but then after the winter months, it's not in any shape to be reused again. And so they're just so good at constructing it, construct a new
Right.
one. Some birds are what are known as cavity nesters. So they're looking for holes in, dead tree snags or telephone poles. And so those will be reused year after year, but usually kind of like zhuzhed up. So like you'll see that like a hole that existed and was used the previous year, you'll see them hard at work. You'll see sawdust spraying out of the hole literally as they're kind of cleaning it up, getting the debris out and bringing new like some grasses in to make it nice and soft in there.
I wouldn't be surprised, probably some of you see Western bluebird boxes set up around to try to attract and invite Western bluebirds to nest. And Western bluebirds and violet green swallows and tree swallows all sort of use the same size of hole for nesting. So I wouldn't be surprised that in a single season, there could be an incident of, a violet green swallow using a particular nest cavity and then completing that cycle. And then another bird, maybe a different species, coming a little bit later and starting a bit of a later cycle in that same nest cavity. So that's prime territory right there. And a lot of those nest cavities, sometimes they're old woodpecker holes also. So it's kind of nice that some of them do get reused.
It's called a bird nest timeshare. I think that's the technical term. That there's probably some website that they're on.
That happens on our property
Yeah.
with the tree swallow and the Western bluebird. So here's some kind of early questions that was more about ID and diagnostics. Does the female robin look like the male robin?
Great question.
Yes, generally, yes, but you can often tell a difference in the vibrancy of color, which can help indicate if it's a male or a female. So the male robins are the most vibrant. It's like their heads are closer to black rather than gray, and their breasts are like a very deep orange color. And then the female robins are more of like a paler, dull gray on their heads and their backs and wings, and then a more pale orange on the front. But inevitably, you're going to get some that are kind of right in the middle, and then you might have a little difficulty telling those two apart.
Okay,
Individual
great.
variation. There's a cool term for that. It's called sexually dimorphic, is when you can tell the males and the females apart. And most, maybe not most birds, but a lot of birds in the area that are just coming to my mind, you can't tell them apart, like the chestnut-backed chickadee or the open-head mouse. There might be like some slight differences in size, but that would only be something you'd be able to tell if they're sitting right next to each other. And even that could just be enough individual.
But I love the wren tit, the eye. That was
Yes.
that was some new learning. That was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably one of my favorite little things that like this little teeny eye color you can actually tell. Yeah.
Gotta see the eye. Here's another early question about ID. How can one tell the difference between a Anna's female and an Allen's hummingbird? Because they come through. Yeah.
Generally, the Anna's hummingbirds, whether they're male or female, are strictly green, iridescent green, and gray on their chest, and then green on their backs. And of course, then the male Anna's hummingbird has the hot pink or magenta throat. The Allen's hummingbirds, which do breed here in the springtime, are a mixture of green and specifically orange. So if you ever see a hummingbird with orange somewhere around its body, you're either looking at an Allen's hummingbird or, to complicate things further, a Rufous hummingbird, which is a bird that does not breed here, but does travel through and is seen during its migration through the area. So green and orange is either an Allen's hummingbird or a Rufus hummingbird. Green and gray is the Anna's hummingbird. And if you see a green and orange hummingbird in a nest, then that's 100% going to be an Allen's hummingbird because it's breeding here.
Wow, that was great. Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to end with this is another, how do I tell the difference? Which used to bug, I just had the most difficulty, but I finally just kept looking and looking and looking and watching. And how do I tell the difference between the Nuttall, the Downy, and the hairy woodpeckers?
Well, this is such a timely question, and we'll send you to our blog, I'm Birding Right Now, because we actually literally just completed a post where we break down the 7 or actually 8 woodpeckers that you can see in the Bay Area. We'll put a link to it right now. But the quick answer is the back pattern is going to be your best ally on telling those apart. So the Nuttall has the white horizontal stripes on the back, and then the Downy and the hairy both have these vertical white patches. And then the Downy and the hairy, they just look identical to each other. The hairy is bigger and the Downy is a little smaller. And if you get a good look at their beak length, that is a really good way to tell. The Downy woodpecker has a really petite bill. It almost looks like a songbird rather than a woodpecker, where the hairy woodpecker has a more like woodpecker-esque bill that's basically the whole, like if you were to overlay it over its head, it would be basically the size of its head, where the Downy woodpecker is much shorter. And if you were to overlay the bill on its head, it would just be about, half the length. And then we always like to come back to vocalizations. Learning their vocalizations is really helpful because they'll often just give it away by the sounds that they make. Is another way.
Wow. Thank you so much. This was just an amazing, amazing time. And I know everybody loved and learned. And you've got all these resources. All want to thank you so much for just an amazing, amazing learning, fun, adventurous time. And we're all going to rush out to one of your walks on with Sonoma Land Trust. It's going to
I
be
can't wait.
Love to see everybody out on the land. That's doing these presentations is so much fun, and you can actually kind of feel the energy, which is awesome. But being out on the land, looking at the birds,
well, and it's a journey, right? All this, love of observing nature, and especially birds, because we can see them. It's just it's a life journey.